Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, October 4th, 2017 edition of the Carolina Weather Group. We're really happy to have you tonight. As you probably have heard, the tropics are active once again, and that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. We have Will Simmons on from the Air Force Reserve. He's actually one of the hurricane hunters who flies into these crazy storms, and so we look forward to having Will on with us for the hour and kind of talking about what all he does and kind of some memorable stories of flying into hurricanes. So thank you for joining us tonight, Will. We look forward to it. Before we start, though, tonight, this is a live broadcast. So if you have any questions or comments during the show, please feel free to reach out to us. You can do that many different ways. You can follow us on Twitter, Carolina WX Group. You can comment on the Facebook page, or James has the Periscope and the Facebook Live stream going as well as the YouTube live stream going. So many ways for you to communicate with us tonight and submit your questions if you have any for Will. And then if you are listening on the rebroadcast, we'll kind of give you some social media outlets that you can follow what the hurricane hunters do as they fly into these storms. So before we get into the tropics tonight, let's quickly go around the panel, let everybody introduce yourself and talk about what the weather's like in their area. So we'll start, as we always do, out to our west. I'm going to bring in Eric, who's in the Memphis area. Eric, how's the weather there in West Tennessee?
It's too warm, Scotty. It's too warm. Summer came back again this week. Fortunately, the dew points are down a little bit, but we're 87 yesterday, mid 80s. Until we get this big front coming through next week, we're really looking forward to fall. It's sticking around at some point, and it looks like it's about a week out. So we're going to hang in there a little bit while longer, and it's getting pretty dry here too. The only decent rain we've gotten in the last 6 weeks or so have been remnants of tropical systems. So I hope that we get some rain, but maybe not from another tropical system coming over the Mid-South. We'll see how that works out.
All about those models and where that track takes what soon to be Nate. Let's go to the east part of Tennessee and eastern Tennessee in the Bristol area. Let's bring in Ricky Matthews tonight. Ricky, you've been away from the past couple of weeks, so we're happy to have you back tonight. How have you been?
Oh, I was almost awake in tonight. We had a moderate chemical explosion at our nearby chemical plant today, and that was fun stuff. No injuries reported from that. A little shelter in place that was in effect for a couple hours, but everything's been handled at Eastman Chemical Plant in Kingsport. But happy to be back, Scotty, and now just kind of watching where Nate goes, see if we get any rain on this side. It's been like 20 days or something since we've seen rain in Bristol.
It's been pretty dry here in western North Carolina. I'll kind of talk about our weather. It's been warm and dry. It's been 20 days or 21 days. I can't remember. I have my tally mark somewhere, but it's been 21 days since we've had measurable rainfall here in the Western Carolina. So we are looking forward to some rainfall, maybe from the tropics. And another place that has been dry is the Charlotte metro area. Let's bring in James Brierton, who is in the Queen City tonight. James, how are things down there? Uh-oh, I think James is froze. His picture is froze. So we will skip James tonight, who is not with us right now. Let's go down to Charleston, South Carolina. We'll bring in Jared Smith. Jared, how's things down in the low country?
Well, it was nice for a few days, and then it's slowly creeping up, getting warm, but it's not too bad. The onshore flow and the onshore winds have been a little brisk, but has kept a nice breeze over the area. Watching Nate, let's see what he does. Might bring us a little bit more rain. Just about all of our rain last month in September was from Irma. So very dry pattern, very tranquil pattern aside from some of the onshore winds. Watching the tides a little bit, might have some tidal flooding at times of high tide over the next few days. But yeah, it's really going to be interesting to see where Nate ultimately ends up and any impacts that we might get from that. So back to you, Scotty.
All right, and speaking of Nate, let's bring in our tropics expert, Mr. Shay Gibson. Shay, I know you had a couple of down days, but the tropics are back and looking to be active again. How's things looking in your area of Charleston or just off the coast there? And then I'll let you go into the tropics first, talk about what's going on there.
Yeah. Like Jared said, brisk winds. We've had a pretty fairly well-established gradient up and down the eastern coast from the mid-Atlantic all the way down to southern Florida. So we've had quite a bit of wind. I mean, we've had 30 miles an hour plus, gusting up near 40 miles an hour for several days now. Today finally weakened a little bit. We kept it right around 30 to 33, I think. And then the gradient will continue to weaken tomorrow. A lot of shifting getting ready to happen, so that blocking high will break down. It will wobble out into the Atlantic. We'll start to see the winds bend a little bit more southeast. We'll get some moisture starting to come up from the Gulf, and we do have the tropics to talk about. I'll share a screen, and let me know when you can see the screen that I have.
Yes, we got it.
You got it. Okay, so I'm going to present to everybody. We always have, you know, these areas right here are typical areas where you might see origination of tropical cyclone development this time of the year in October. So this is a typical spot to see development, especially in the warm Caribbean Sea. Very warm water, very deep warm water at that. It's been relatively untouched for some time now, and it's been left alone to sort of gather its oceanic heat content or tropical cyclone heat potential. So we have the epipelagic layer of water, which is very deep for the warm layer, up to 200-300 feet. I imagine that'll be a question for Will tonight. What kind of sondes or readings do you get from the water? How often do they drop? How deep do they go? These are all important points of information, but I'm sure we'll find that out soon enough. We have Tropical Depression 16, which formed today, and winds about 35 miles an hour, pressure at 1,005 millibars. It's moving to the northwest at 7. And the NHC track brings this up towards the United States. So we could be looking at another potential landfall hurricane from this, according to the latest NHC track. There's some model guidance that's a little bit shifty. There's some disagreement for right now, but the general consensus, especially from the Euro, is that it does develop this system, and we may see rapid intensification from it based on some of the latest parameters. The Euro is really on top of it. So we'll be watching that one. We'll be watching GFS and other models as well. The hurricane recon data will be extremely important for this as it lifts up. It's going to have some interaction with land, so there's going to be some potential weakening processes along this current track that may keep it, you know, not forming quite as quick. So if we look at the rainbow imagery, we can see that there is a low-level circulation. It's defined. It's well enough defined to call it a tropical depression, but it hasn't gathered enough convection around the core and really kind of blown up or intensified to tropical storm status. That's why they're holding at 35 miles per hour. That's sort of what's going on there. The recon for today, 1,000 confirmed, 1,005 millibars, or near that, maybe just a little bit lower, but for the most part, 1,005. And so, you know, the real concern here is the northern Gulf Coast. So if you live along these areas, you might want to start looking at what you have prepared for tropical storm or hurricane force type of event for your area. And it's not to say go freak out and go to the store and all that stuff right now. It just means you need to be watching this area very closely. I would say at least twice a day. Tune into your local news. Tune into the National Weather Service for your area if you live along this coast. Very important to know what's coming, and you have some time. So we're looking at Sunday for it to be affecting the coast. So that's very important information there, guys, for everyone out there watching that lives along this area. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Scotty. Maybe we'll get with Eric to introduce our guest tonight, and we can launch right into our discussion tonight on hurricane hunters.
Yeah, we'll do it. So, Eric, I'm going to hand it to you, and we'll get the conversation started.
All right. Thank you very much. And we're pleased to have with us tonight somebody that I've known kind of through Twitter for a while and have hooked up with here recently. He is a 2011 graduate of Mississippi State University, meteorologist there, got his meteorology degree, and I'll let him give us a little bit more of his background as we get into this here. But for now, he is with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, flying the WC-130s into these beasts out in the Atlantic. And we're glad to have on tonight Captain Will Simmons from the U.S. Air Force Reserves. How are you doing tonight, Will?
I'm good. Thanks for having me tonight. Looking forward to the show.
Yeah, we are too. This is an exciting topic, obviously a very topical discussion tonight, and interesting to get this perspective from the air rather than seeing everything from the ground tonight. So appreciate you being on. So I want to start off and see if you might recognize, let me do a quick screen share here, see if you might recognize the guy on the right side of the screen. Is that you?
You know, I've been asked that. That is not. That's with the NOAA hurricane hunters. So the NOAA guys wear the blue flight suits. We're in the green flight suits here.
Sure.
So actually, my
your twin.
mother-in-law actually saw that on Twitter or social media somewhere, and she was telling people that was me. So even my mother-in-law was kind of confused, but close.
Wow.
But same,
Okay.
same concept, but not me.
I'll let this roll for just a few seconds here. This is actually video from the NOAA plane then as it was going into Hurricane Irma. And there's the eye of Irma. I look back at the when this video was taken and where the storm was, and it was just approaching the Leeward Islands with 185-mile-an-hour winds. So this is what it looks like out the front of the NOAA airplane, and I'm going to guess that it's a fairly similar view for you out there as well. So let's start off though, backing up just a little bit, and if you would give us a little bit of background on how you kind of got interested in weather. Where that started from, and then how that kind of blossomed into where you are now.
Yeah, sure. You know, it seems like a lot of meteorologists have kind of a side hobby of aviation or vice versa. A lot of pilots kind of dabble a little bit in meteorology. So I'm very similar, but I go back to junior high. I started really liking airplanes. Short story is I got my pilot's license when I was in high school. And so I started in aviation first, flying airplanes, getting my license there. And then studying for my instrument rating so that I could actually fly through clouds and not have to cancel my weekend trips. So studying like for my instrument rating, I got more interested in weather in high school. And that was kind of, I guess, my fallback plan initially was going into somewhere in the meteorology field. So I got my degree in that at State. So started out the aviation buff, then kind of transferred to meteorology. Like you said, 2011 graduate from Mississippi State. I think I met you first like 10 years ago now. It seems like it's amazing how quickly that's gone by. But anyway, so after that, worked for 2 years as a meteorologist, the morning, noon weather guy at a TV station, the CBS affiliate in North Mississippi. Had a lot of fun doing that. However, my first passion of aviation kind of took over, and I kept seeing airplanes fly around, so I kind of wanted to dabble back into the aviation field. And somebody from the Hurricane Hunters actually came and spoke to one of our AMS chapter meetings at State. So whenever she got done, I kind of picked her brain and made some connections. And so finally, a couple years later, I actually put those connections to use and made a phone call, and it worked out. They were actually hiring pilots. So I get the front row seat now. So it's been fun.
Yeah, the first one into the turbulence, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so your interest then kind of was in flying originally, but the meteorology was that was kind of your when you went into meteorology there at State. Then that was kind of the direction you thought you were going to be headed until this kind of came back up. Then is that right?
Yeah, it was. Had a lot of fun doing meteorology. I worked with some great people at my first TV station, interned at a couple of places as well. I loved being able to communicate the weather with the viewers, as I'm sure many of us in the business do. The social media aspect, of course, all into that as well. But just that first passion of flying airplanes kind of took over. So now I'm kind of getting to do both. I get to do stuff like this. I still go do school visits sometimes, and I'm still out in the community talking about weather and hurricane preparedness. Every year we do a hurricane awareness tour where we go out to different locations across the U.S. and the Caribbean, and we just kind of give people a heads up. Hey, it's hurricane season again. Be sure you're prepared for that. This is our mission. This is why we do what we do. So I'm still getting some of that public relation aspect, and still getting able to fly airplanes and have, as you said, a pretty cool aspect or view of some of these storms. It's a really neat perspective that many people don't get.
So I got to guess that's fairly unique among the Hurricane Hunter pilots to also be a meteorologist. Is that true? Because I think most of the meteorologists are probably sitting in the back of the plane, aren't they?
It is. You're right. And I think that was actually probably one of the hiring points is, oh, wait, a pilot who actually knows a little bit about what he's fixing to fly into. So back when I interviewed, I think that was did kind of help me out a little bit. And, since I've been here, this is my third season at the squadron now since I finished all my training. Air Force pilot training, and then C-130 school to actually be a pilot in the military aircraft. So once I finished all that training, this is now my third season. But I've kind of put my meteorologist hat aside a little bit, and just flying the airplane, planning missions, all the stuff that goes along with that. It's kind of a full-time job in itself. Of course, I still look at models and do my own little bit of personal forecasting, I guess, but all the official forecast questions, I definitely defer that to the Hurricane Center and our weather officers.
Will, you mentioned how you kind of plan the missions. Talk about the process of how that goes on. I know you guys get tasked right from the Hurricane Center to fly the missions, and then you guys kind of plan them out from there on.
Yeah, exactly. So Carco, we call it, chief at the Hurricane Center in Miami. We are waiting on pins and needles every day for the plan of the day to come out. So it's the guys at the Hurricane Center every day looking at it, and they're the ones that actually task us as well as the NOAA guys. If they want, say, a 12-hourly mission, or if they want to cut that in half, they want to fix on the storm every 6 hours, or as it approaches landfall every 3 hours. So they're really kind of controlling how often we're out there flying. And so that plan of the day, the pod comes out every morning, and that kind of gets us in gear. So this morning, for instance, we found out that we're going to keep flying this tomorrow and then through the week. So the scheduling shop was crazy with helmets on fire and trying to get crews and planes put together for the next few days. So it definitely initiates with NHC. Then it comes to us, the schedulers, who ultimately reach out to us saying, hey, are you free to fly the storm?
And safety, is always a top priority when you guys are flying. And I fly myself as a private pilot, so I mean, safety is the #1 priority in aviation in general. Talk a little bit about how these missions are tasked with safety. I've seen a couple Hurricane Hunter missions that the C-130's gone out or the P-3's gone out, then they've encountered some mechanical issue or some issue and had to turn around. What's the protocol with that?
Yeah, fortunately, we have a phenomenal safety record. The C-130 is just a workhorse for the aircraft. It's a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling having 4 engines. Back in my private pilot days, where I learned in a Cessna 152, so just having one single engine out there. So it's nice having 3 extra engines, and the airplane will fly just fine on 3 engines. If we had to, we can make it on 2, but the mission's definitely over at that point. I've been on one mission where we came close to having to shut an engine down. Didn't have to. Fortunately, we did some troubleshooting and worked it out. But there have been people that have been out there for whatever reason, and really not even as a result of anything the weather's doing, just something perhaps with the airplane. They've had to cut the mission short. So we always have 2 aircraft ready to fly at any given time. So, for instance, this morning we had a crew going out to fly TD-16. And so they took off, and then as soon as they took off, we have a loadmaster on the ground who goes to our spare aircraft, preps it, gets it ready. So in the event that one crew goes out, they have an issue, and they have to turn around and come back, we have an airplane ready for them, ready to go, and they can just quickly transition from their old airplane to the new airplane, so we can still get out and hopefully make the fix on time, because we do all we can to help out the Hurricane Center and make those fixes. It's really important for the forecast. So we have the spare aircraft, but we have a good record so far, knock on wood, where we haven't had to do that too many times. The C-130, especially the J model that we have now, it's the newest aircraft in the Air Force inventory for C-130s. Super reliable aircraft, haven't had a whole lot of problems with it, so hopefully that will continue this season. And we actually had 10 aircraft in the fleet, so they try to give us, of course, the healthiest bird to go fly the storm to set us up for success in the beginning.
That was going to be my question. How many planes do you guys have? And I know these aircraft are modified, right, in terms of the instruments on board, not so much the airframe, but they have different instruments on board, correct?
Yeah, so our radar's a little more beefed up, I guess you'd say, compared to the C-130 next door. But like you said, the actual airframe itself, the C-130 is good like it is, so we don't have to beef up the actual structure. And then we have external fuel tanks, so we can fly, if we had to, up to 14 hours. By that point, everybody's getting tired and ready to land, because nobody's going to come out there and refuel us anyways. So the fuel that we take off with is what we have. So my longest mission, I think, is just under 12 hours. I've done that a few times. Most of our missions, when I was flying Maria this past week, most of our missions were about 10 hours. So we try to take 3 pilots, just so one pilot or 2 pilots can fly about 4 hours. Somebody can get out of the seat and do a seat swap. Somebody can take a nap, and we try to work out the crew schedule so we can, not be fatigued. Obviously, that's a big part of flying airplanes as well as staying alert. But yeah, 10 aircraft, and yeah, we fly up to 14 hours. So it can make for a long day.
Now, Will, I got a question for you. Now, a lot of viewers are probably thinking this. I'm sure that these flights are not all about having a nice, easy breakfast with a cup of coffee. Tell us a little bit about the turbulence. Like, how rough is this flight? Is it in comparison to a commercial airliner flying near severe thunderstorms? Put it in perspective, what you deal with on the plane as you're flying into these systems.
Yeah, you'd actually probably be surprised. The exciting, very turbulent moments aren't too long lasting, and for the most part, it is once we get close to the eye wall until we break out into the eye. So I would say, cruising out to the storm, we're about 23,000 feet. Most airliners going across the country are at 30-something thousand feet. So we're about 23,000 just because we're a propeller-driven aircraft. But once we get about 100 miles out from the storm, we'll descend down to 10,000 feet, and we stay at 10,000 feet for unless something crazy happens, 10,000 for the duration of our fixed mission. And at 10,000, I would say from 100 miles out till about the eye wall, light to moderate turbulence. So similar to what you would feel in an airline, just amplified just a little bit, not anything to write home about. But then once you get to the eye wall, there's definitely been a few times, it's more of the exception, but we've had, like a water bottle or something might have fallen off, or we kind of, we have what's called a heads-up display in our aircraft, where we can, look out front of us and the pilots see the instruments right in front of our faces instead of looking down at the cockpit. So there have been times where you're looking at the instruments and it turns all blurry and it just kind of chicken soup. So I would call that more moderate to. I don't think I've ever had severe turbulence, but definitely some pretty solid moderate turbulence to write home about around the eye wall. Fortunately, in those moments, just a couple minutes in length, we break out into the eye and everything's, a lot better then. Then you got to go back through the other side to get out. So times two.
Wow. Yeah. I'm thinking, flying into Category 5 hurricanes like Maria, 185 miles an hour winds. Are you going head into that or sideways? I mean, how does the plane respond to that kind of headwind? I mean, you got gusts over 200 miles an hour.
Exactly. And yeah, I was on the Irma flight where we got winds around 185 miles per hour, my first Category 5 hurricane. And the weather officer on board, they have a lot of instruments they're dealing with. And I can't say I know their system by any means, so I'll have to get one of those guys to you sometime. But we do all we can to keep the winds coming off the direct side of the aircraft perpendicular. So the whole time we're flying straight into the eye, the winds are coming at our sides. All we do is point our nose, crab essentially, into the wind to keep a straight course into the eye. So, and really the sideways movement, even though it's, gusts 200 miles per hour, if moving side to side, the aircraft really is pretty good. It's when you start getting the big vertical updrafts and downdrafts where some of us kind of sits down the seatbelt a little bit tighter, and you start seeing the altimeter fluctuate, plus or minus a few hundred feet within a matter of a few seconds. And that's when you're like, okay, let's find a better area of the storm to kind of work our way through. But for the most part, the sideways winds, even 200 miles per hour, as long as you crab in to keep a straight course, you'll have a few bumps. But it's really the up and down movements when the storm is really growing. Some of the worst turbulence I've had has been in tropical storms, really gaining strength and intensifying really quickly, but like stable hurricanes. I flew through, before I get into that, one of our pilots that did fly Hurricane Irma a couple of weeks ago as a Category 5 said it was one of the smoothest flights she's ever had, just because I guess it had stabled out by that point and maybe there wasn't a whole lot of convection. It was just really strong winds. So I'm not quite sure the setup, but he said for him it wasn't turbulent really at all. So it just kind of depends on what stage the hurricane is in.
Well, we have a viewer question that kind of goes in with what you're talking about right now. This is from Ron Plumley. He wants to know about what's the stress level for you guys as you're going into this recon mission. I mean, we can imagine, going through these bigger storms that might be a little bit higher. But talk about what the environment's like, maybe what the stress level's like as you're flying into this beast.
Yeah, the first thing I thought of when you said that was Harvey that I flew a few weeks ago. I had a 2 o'clock in the morning takeoff. So first I was trying to wake myself up and got as much coffee as I could. And then we try to keep a good bit of coffee on board as well. But as far as the stress, this is my third season, but I think I'm still the newest pilot. So I guess I'm still the rookie here. I need somebody else to come along to take that title from me. But we have a lot of seasoned, very experienced guys here. So some of the people the squadron have over 250 to 300 hurricane penetrations. So for them, I wouldn't quite call it old hat, but we have it down to a pretty good process now. How we get out there, the patterns that we fly, what to do if we encounter certain turbulence. And even though hurricane season is only a certain point or length throughout the year, we still fly year-round doing training missions out over the Gulf, even though there's not, it's nice weather and pretty sunsets. We still do training missions where we're kind of simulating what we do in the storm. So as you might expect with the Air Force, a lot of people think Air Force, military, overseas doing tactical missions, but we are Air Force trained and we put a lot of time into that. So as far as the stress level, I've never been really too stressed out or too worried. For me, being a meteorologist as well, it's, I have a lot of excitement just because of, what we're about to go do and looking at the satellite view before I go out, kind of see the magnitude of the storm. So kind of a mix of excitement and, but at the same time, like, this weekend we have potential effects on the Gulf where my house is, my family is, our airplanes are. So it does, start to hit close to home as well. So that's when you get maybe a little bit more stressed out about it. But overall, you're flying with a lot of very experienced people.
Will, if you could kind of go back just a little bit to, for those that aren't quite as familiar with exactly what goes on the Hurricane Hunter planes when you're out, what, like when you go out on a mission, how many people are on that airplane, kind of just in general, what the responsibilities are of those people, and then some of the equipment that you're using. I know you got the radar that's on there, but I think there'll be a question coming up on drop signs, but SFMR, some of that kind of equipment. Can you talk about those things?
Yeah, definitely. So the bare minimum crew that we take out is 5 people. We have 2 pilots. One is the aircraft commander who has the ultimate authority for what goes on the flight. We have a navigator, excuse me, and the navigator does a lot of the mission planning as far as, we're crossing a lot of international territory. We do our best to stay away from land and other territories that don't care for us. So we try not to fly over their airspace. So they do a lot of the planning with the maps and also the fuel conservation. They're always monitoring our fuel. They're kind of like the old school flight engineers that a lot of planes used to have. So they kind of took over some of that role as well as the navigating part. We had the weather officer. We called them the ARWO, Aerial Reconnaissance Weather Officer. So at least one of them. And then we have a load master. So those are the guys that are actually dropping the instruments inside the storm. So 5 total. However, if we can, we like to have a 3rd pilot on board as well as additional crew members, especially for those long flights. But we like to augment, especially the pilots, with a 3rd pilot so we can switch out because it is fatiguing. Somebody has to, as you would imagine, always be at the controls, always watching the instruments, on the radios, talking. And, we get up to stretch our legs every now and then. But 5 is the minimum. We like to take more. And as far as the equipment, I do have one. It's an older drop sign here with us. It's, kind of looks like a enlarged paper towel tube almost. Here's one of the sensors at the bottom. And then if I were to undo this, there's a parachute on top of it, essentially. So this is the drop sign you probably heard a lot about. And we put in a tube inside the aircraft, the load master does, and it's what falls down to the surface. So we drop these about 10,000 feet, and it falls about 2,000 feet per minute to the surface, collecting temperature, wind speed, dew point, pressure. And as it's doing that, it's in real time, the information is getting sent back to the aircraft. And if you're I saw somebody pull up the Tropical Tidbits site earlier. I mean, you can pull that information up as well in a nice, pretty format that our weather officer on the back of the plane is helping to put that together to make it a little bit easier to decipher. But anyway, so the drop sign is one of our bread and butter instruments. The design's changed a little bit over the years, but still measuring the same things. So very pivotal there. And then, like you said, the SMRF, the Stepped Frequency Microwave Radiometer, I believe is what that stands for. So that's actually mounted on the side or the underside of the wing, and it's essentially shooting down from what I understand, and also able to measure wind speeds and what's going on at the surface by that mounted on the side of the wing, kind of shooting down towards the water. I'm not sure the exact verbiage there, but the SMRF, as you mentioned, and then the drop sign, kind of our 2 go-tos. With Irma and Jose, we actually had some Navy officers on board, and they were doing some research with buoys. So while the Navy officers were on board with those flights, I was on those flights as well, we actually released some buoys for the Navy. And so their equipment, we dropped it down and just along the line of longitude every few miles. And the plan was for the hurricane to track over those buoys that were essentially floating a few feet down in the water to kind of see more synoptic scale what's going on with the ocean as storms approach. With these here, once they hit the water, from what I understand, they pretty much stop transmitting, and supposedly they're biodegradable, so they're supposedly environmentally friendly. But anyway, so they stop transmitting. But once we get the data, the weather officer goes through it, make sure everything actually looks good, and then they'll send it to the Hurricane Center. I'm not sure the turn time on that, probably less than 15 minutes. Excuse me. And then the Hurricane Center gets it, and they'll update the forecast and the models as well.
Now, the sondes that you drop into the water to get the water heat depth, how far down do those transmit, and what are you looking for exactly with these sondes that you drop in the water?
Yeah, the sondes in the water. I'm sorry, guys. You may have to talk for a second. I'm getting over some sickness. I have to cough here in a minute. If you just talk amongst yourself for a second and get some water, and I'll be right back. I promise.
Not a problem at all. Not a problem at all.
Will's going to convince me to join the Hurricane Hunters here before the show's over, though. It's going to be the moral of this story. But you know, Shay, we see all this data, we get all these sonde data, and it's really interesting to see kind of how the sausage is made almost. I mean, you've got some data you were showing earlier. You think about all this stuff that goes on just in one hurricane or flight, and all the stuff they have to carry, all the people they have to carry. It's really, you know, it's an awesome, what's the word I'm looking for? An awesome, I don't know. It's cool.
No, I mean, it's great. It's great. I mean, it's fantastic because we could all kinds of great data. You know, like when Irma was making landfall here, you know, there's all kinds of information coming in from these sondes, and this is really good stuff because you can get an idea of what exactly was going on at land, and then you have wind speeds, gusts, everything of this nature. This is a program through Google Earth Pro. This is a really good one. We use it, but it gives you all the different points, the wind barbs, your sondes, your different readings, and things that are going on. So they try to get where the landfall was actually occurring. You know, what was actually occurring in this spot. So I mean, you know, it's just fascinating information that they can get just by dropping something down and get a vertical profile of the atmosphere all the way down. So from whatever altitude they are, it's very helpful.
So does all of that, I'm sorry, does all of that information from the drop sondes and stuff also go into the computer models? I guess it does, huh?
Oh yeah, it's ingested in the latest runs of the computer models. So, you know, depending on the run, some of it gets missed in the very next update. It may catch it like midnight. And the Hurricane Hunters, you know, they drop their data, and then it's either ingested in the next run if it gets in time, or it goes. And it definitely gets ingested into the higher resolution model runs because those up the refresh rate is a lot faster. But yeah, your GFS 12Z and midnight run, the Euro midnight and the 12 p.m. runs both incorporate all the data from weather balloon readings, drop sondes, any of that information. They get it all. So if the GFS picks that up on a 6 p.m. or a 6 a.m. one, hey, that's even better. But usually you'll find that in your the HER and the NAM, the higher resolution models, that they'll pick that up a little sooner, especially the HER because it refreshes every hour. So I think it might pick up that information too. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the WRF model really zeroes in on that kind of stuff.
Let's kind of rewrite here. It's about 8:50. We do have Will Simmons, Air Force Reserve Hurricane Hunter, with us tonight, talking about the missions that they fly into these hurricanes. So if you are watching tonight, feel free to interact with us. We've had some good comments on our Facebook pages and our Twitter pages. So I think Will's back, so I'm going to toss it back to Eric as we continue with the questions.
All right, Will. So give us some ideas. You know, we've got all of this high-tech ways of getting weather information these days. We've got the new satellites. We've got, you know, radars all over the place. Why are we still flying airplanes into hurricanes? What are the benefits of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And satellites, they're great we love them as well. Right before we go out, we step by the weather shop at Keesler. We get an update on, hey, what's going on? And our weather officer, as you can imagine, looking at a lot of products before you head out. So great for the overall synoptic picture. We get the general idea of patterns, and with a lot of the high-res satellites now, we can see a lot of good features. However, of course, lack of radar, for one thing, over the ocean. But once we get out there with the dropsondes, the Smurf, the radar that we have, all those things put together, we're still collecting some really good information that you just can't get from satellites orbiting the Earth, essentially. So and by us getting directly in the center of the storm and measuring the pressure to get an accurate pressure, that's if we can't get anything else, that's what the Hurricane Center wants is the pressure, and the winds follow that. But just being right there in it and getting those really detailed observations is what helps the forecast. And the Hurricane Center has told us, at least, that our data helps improve or decrease that forecast column up to 30%. So over, if you're talking from South Florida to somewhere North Carolina, we can shrink that by 30%. We're ultimately decreasing the amount of coastline that would potentially have to evacuate. We've heard numbers such as it costs up to $1 million per mile of coastline that has to evacuate. So we're saving the government a lot of money by ultimately being able to decrease that forecast column. So we can get out there and find any kind of details as far as the winds or kind of changes of pressure that would help the models and increase the forecast, and ultimately decrease that forecast column is what we're out there to do. It saves the government ultimately millions of dollars.
And of course, that question was devil's advocate there too, because working for an airline, I know that there's just general aircraft, commercial and others that are flying around that are also collecting weather data and feeding that into the models and so forth too. So, but yeah, it's I have heard that before though. Why do we have these old airplanes and they're still going up and flying these very dangerous missions and putting lives at risk to do this? And I think it's an interesting. It's certainly a direct way of getting that information. So one other kind of question that I had that I've seen, I think others may not necessarily be aware of, is the hurricane hunters do not fly into the center of a storm when it's over land. Is that correct? And what is the reason for that?
That's correct. Once it gets, well, first of all, the land interaction, a lot of times we don't know the effects of what's going to happen when the hurricane or storm passes over land, so it can get extremely turbulent. If we're flying out over the Caribbean, there are a lot of small islands, but some of those islands have some pretty good terrain on them as far as changes of elevation to some pretty good peaks. We're flying at 10,000 feet, so shouldn't ever come close to it. But for one thing, it's just the turbulence once the storm interacts. It's just something that we'll try to avoid, and we can actually still do what's called a radar fix, even though we don't fly through the exact center of the eye and release an instrument and drop that down to the center to fix it that way. We can fly just off the coast, use our radar to kind of plot a circle around where the eye is and fix the exact center of the storm. We're not getting the pressure, but we can fix the exact center of the storm or close to the center of the storm that way. So just the effects of the turbulence. And also, some cases, we just don't have the diplomatic clearance to fly over some of those islands out there. They say, thank you for what you do. However, we'd rather the Air Force not fly your planes over our island. So that's, political part of it's also something. As far as the U.S., once the, hurricane gets over the U.S., hopefully our radars are still up and running and really just not needed at that point.
Will, is there any differences between your aircraft besides obviously the airframe, more like maybe the stuff carried on board, and the NOAA aircraft?
I've actually haven't been on one of the NOAA aircraft before. I've been on one of their social media deals where they walk through the airplane, but I wouldn't be the best to comment on that, unfortunately. They do very similar stuff to us, and they do a lot more of the research aspect, from what I understand. But as far as their equipment, I'd be lying to you if I told you a specific answer on that.
All right. Well, I got a different question. I got a bunch, so
sure.
Bear with me. So is there any difference between flying a day mission and a night mission?
Good question. And I've talked a lot about fixed missions, which is for those, that's when we actually, we're generally 10,000 feet, fly through the center, and we find the exact center. However, we also have what's called the low-level invest, and that's what one of our crews went out today in TD-16. They did a low-level invest today, meaning we're flying anywhere from 500 feet to 1,500 feet, so pretty close to the water, doing an investigation out there. So during the day, we can fly as low as 500 feet over the water, and as long as we're clear clouds and can see outside and you see the water below, we can do that all day long. However, once it transitions to night, we have certain requirements where we have to climb just because maybe oil rigs out there that aren't charted on maps, or some type of vessel that has a mast on it that we're not picking up, or for whatever reason. So we have to climb at night to higher altitudes during low-level invest missions, and those are missions where we're trying to see if there's a full circulation, a closed circulation in all 4 quadrants. As far as flying the fixed missions, really not a big difference there. And my first flight into a hurricane was Hurricane Joaquin, 2015. It was at night. I think it was Category 3 at that point, if I remember right. So it was a night mission, and for me, it was just odd because we were getting bounced around, and you couldn't see anything. I mean, if you're driving down the road and turn your headlights off and everything goes black, you can feel your car moving, but you can't see anything outside. So that was weird to me, my first flight at night. I mean, it was normal, and as far as the fixed missions, we really don't change up a whole lot, if anything, but it is just a little odd to me, not being able to see what you're going into, but still getting bounced around. You just have to trust the radar and the weather officer and your training, and everything's been good so far.
When you're flying into these missions, do you ever get readings from the weather officer? Do you ever, have them tell you, hey, we just got a reading of this or whatever, or are you more focused on actually flying the aircraft?
Yeah, and we fly on the autopilot as much as we can. Autopilot does a great job for us, and after a 12-hour flight, we're all exhausted, so we just kind of babysit what George is doing to the aircraft. But yeah, so we're kind of right there with the weather officer. We're into it as well. So we're watching the wind speeds. We have it up on our screen as well, so we're kind of reading it back as well. Oh, I just saw it. We just hit 100, or in the case of Irma, we were, there's 150. But yeah, the weather officer, they kind of keeps up to date with, okay, we're now encountering tropical storm force winds. Okay, we're now at hurricane force winds. So and it's just good for situational awareness. I mean, we're not out there to find, oh yeah, I got the highest wind speed, but just for situational awareness, it's good to know kind of what part of the storm you're in and how strong it's at. But yeah, they're constantly talking to us on the headset.
All right, last question for me, and I promise I'll give it back to everyone else. Has there ever been an oh wow moment, during these flights, or anything that really catches your breath and makes you think, wow, that was incredible?
Yeah, and I hate to keep going back to a couple of weeks ago, but Irma, first Category 5, and was also at night. You saw the video a little bit ago on the show from the NOAA aircraft flying. You saw the stadium effect. Well, I got to see the stadium effect, but it was under a full moon. And it was just, the perfect storm, so to speak, that coming together. Because otherwise, I wouldn't have seen anything, which would have, we're not out there to see pretty things. You're out there to collect data first and foremost. But if I'm out there and there's a stadium effect, I mean, I'm a meteorologist, so I would, wouldn't mind seeing it. So it was having a full moon out there. It was just, I can't put it into words really. I took a few pictures. We had 3 pilots on board, so of course 2 were flying, and so I was, once we got in the eye and winds were relatively light, I was taking pictures as well. Some of those were on my Twitter page, and the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, our Twitter page as well. They have a lot of pictures there. But I'd say flying in Irma, seeing the stadium effect at night under a full moon was, I'm not quite sure how you could beat that view, and you just kind of say, wow, I can't believe I'm doing this.
One more from me. All right, this is a technical one. So there's all this talk about mesovortices inside of the inner eye walls of these giant hurricanes. And for the viewers out there, mesovortices are what we call vortical swirls. They're sort of like supercells spinning around inside of these eye walls, and sometimes they can cross the eye So I wanted to ask, have you had experience with these, and have you seen these actually crossing the entire eye where it would normally be calm, it's actually storming? And what does that do for the flight?
Yeah, over the past few weeks, going, I think it was also Irma, one of the flights there, we saw, and you know, some people think hurricane hunters will fly into anything, and that's not true. We do not want to fly into those mesovortices. We had a crew a few years ago that they think that might be what happened, but they got into something like that, and I mean, everything ended up being fine, but it's just not the situation you want to put yourself in. So a few weeks ago, we were looking at the radar, and the navigator is kind of our radar expert, and of course the meteorologist on board as well. And we were picking up what we thought were those mesovortices. So, so first of all, we figured out a route to get around them. To answer your kind of second question there, I've never seen it go across the eye or where it's kind of isolated. It's more so been off of the eye wall, and then I guess more of a hook type shape is kind of coming off the eye wall itself. But so fortunately, nothing kind of too singular by itself or secluded. That's just kind of coming off the eye, and those are, you know, we have a pretty determined course, kind of a crisscross pattern. We call it an alpha pattern going through the eye, and we'll definitely deviate around those type vortices. I've seen water spouts before out there, so that's kind of neat to see just as a meteorologist. Doing those low-level NVS, so we'll definitely avoid those as well.
Was that you said it was an Irma flight? I seem to remember seeing like you guys went through the eye and then kind of cycled back and went through the eye again. Is that something common, or why would something like that occur?
Well, for one thing, these guys right here, they don't always want to transmit data. So the loadmaster, they'll release the drop sign. We'll give it a few seconds, and usually they say, okay, good sign, and the data will start showing up on the computers. But sometimes you'll hear a bad sign, or the data doesn't show up at all, or if it does, it's just really, I can't think of the word right now, but it's not accurate at all. So we'll actually do a loop around in the eye, kind of a holding pattern, and go back and hit the fix again and drop another sign just to ensure we're getting the best data to give the Hurricane Center. And that's not uncommon. We just try to turn into the wind. For those aviation guys out there, it decreases your turn radius and decreases your ground speed as well. So we'll turn into the wind and for the holding pattern and hit the fix again. But so that's the main reason why we would do that.
And you mentioned 10,000 feet. What's the average like flight speed and stuff like that when you're flying through a storm?
So we generally fly at 180 knots indicated, so reading directly off our airspeed. And that's because it's a good speed for going fast enough to, of course, create lift and stay in the air, but it's low enough that it's also a structural speed. So as you can imagine, the wings can bend a little bit and give with some of the turbulence and all the updrafts and downdrafts. So that 180 knots that we fly is a good balance of speed, but not going too fast, where if we encounter some type of updraft and downdraft that puts a big G-force on the airplane, that it would put like a structural limit or stress on the aircraft to put it out of limits and hurt us that way. So kind of a good balanced speed there. And kind of my own follow-up to that, the 10,000 feet, excuse me, we fly at 10,000. The meteorologists on board would love to fly lower to get some of the best data towards the surface, but 10,000 is a good safety margin for if something were to happen. That gives us plenty of altitude to recover or troubleshoot or climb back up if need be. So 10,000 is also a good buffer of good data, but also safety.
So let's wrap this up, Will, here with one last question. Then I know you and I'm sure most of your cohorts are full time doing this job. Hurricane season is only a couple of months out of the year that you're actually going in and out of storms. So what does the off season look like when you're not? Is it mostly just training missions? Are you doing a lot of groundwork as well then? And what does the off season look like for you?
Yeah, we do a lot of training missions. I'd say it's about half weather flights where we'd go out over the Gulf and drop instruments. And also, excuse me, we have new guys coming in as well that need training. So, for instance, this past year we had several new navigators come in. So we'd go out and they would get their training on a three-hour flight over the Gulf. We would fly our alpha pattern, we call it. And so a lot of training flights for a lot of the newer people. And we have certain requirements as far as we call it proficiency requirements. For pilots, all we have is we have to have one takeoff, instrument approach, and a landing per month. So pretty low requirements for us. But several weather flights throughout the year. We have a lot of public affairs events. We do flights for some media. And then we also have, this is more so for the pilots, but trainers where we go off station to different parts of the United States and do different, we have a cargo aircraft. So, it'd be a waste not to use some of the back end of the aircraft at other times throughout the year if we can. So sometimes the Air Force actually task us to move a little bit of cargo and do stuff like that. So we have some random missions that pop up throughout the year. I'm a full-time guy at the squadron, but we are a reserve squadron. So most of us, or most people at the squadron, are reservists. They have a civilian job flying for the airlines or school teachers or several different things, but they come in one weekend a month and a few times throughout storm season to be a reserve citizen airman.
Cool. Thanks so much for being on with us tonight. I think we all learned quite a bit, and hopefully the viewing audience also learned a lot about what goes on up there and how important it is to have these missions being flown and how it can provide a benefit to everybody here on the ground as well. So thanks again for taking your time to be on tonight.
Yeah, it's our privilege to be able to do it, and we like doing stuff like this out in the public as well, just to kind of help make our mission known and why we're here and why we are still doing it and why it's important. And we'll be doing it for the next several days as potential Nate comes this way.
Hey, Will, before you leave, do you guys have any social media? I know there's a couple of social media accounts that maybe our followers can follow along on your flights or data or pictures or stuff like that.
Yeah, so as far as following along on flights itself, you saw Tropical Tidbits. That's my go-to. But our official social media for Twitter is 53rd WRS, so 53 RD 53rd, and Weather Reconnaissance Squadron WRS. That's our Twitter handle. And as soon as we land from flights, there are several of us that will send pictures to that account, and they'll get posted pretty quickly after that. So that's the official Twitter page. And then on Facebook, if you just type in Air Force AF Reserve Hurricane Hunters, I think it is, a lot of good content on there as well. You can follow us. Several of us, meteorologists mostly, and then kind of myself, since I did that formerly, we're always updating that with a lot of good pictures from our flights, just because it's such a great perspective, and we know a lot of people want to see it.
Cool. Well, thanks for being with us tonight. We appreciate it, and we hope that you have safe flights, and hopefully you guys won't be too much more busy, or hopefully Nate will be about it.
I know it. Shame on me. I had a weekend trip planned this weekend. It's looking like I'm going to have to cancel, but that's my fault for scheduling it during hurricane season. So.
You gotta. I mean, it seems like this is the third year in a row that the Carolinas have dealt with something tropical. So October seems to be busy now. So. We appreciate it, Will. Stick around if you want to, but we are going to go to our tweet of the weeks and let the guys get ready to have their tweets ready. Is anybody ready to share theirs? Anybody want to go first?
Boy, we really need a foghorn like Weather Brains because I forgot about this. And,
I've got one if you want me to jump.
All right, Eric, you're first, buddy.
All right, let me do a screen share here. So I mentioned at the very front of the show here that it's been really dry around here, and so this is a picture of the Mississippi River out here at Memphis, the new bridge we call it there. We're looking towards in kind of a recreational area called Mud Island there on the right-hand side, and this is low water. This is actually right now, the Mississippi River at Memphis is one of the, I guess it'd be the bottom 10 lowest levels on record here in Memphis. It's at about -6.5, -7 feet. And what you see right there in the middle, this is the Memphis riverfront that has tweeted this, but they say it's the invasion of the pipe monsters. Actually, that's dredging that is taking place where they're clearing out the silt and the mud buildup on the bottom of the river to make sure there's enough draft to get the boats through here. So that's part of what happens when areas, especially to our north, don't get enough rain. The river drops, and they have to take necessary steps to make sure that the commerce continues to flow here in Memphis.
Wow. Interesting stuff.
all right, I found one, Scotty.
All right.
This is an interesting weather follow. I've been following this guy for maybe a month and a half now. He's a cranky weather guy on Twitter. But he's a really smart dude who really tweets some interesting graphics every once in a while. And this is kind of talking about the model spread with 16/8, talking about how there's such a strong amount of uncertainty still, and hopefully how this little area of vorticity here will resolve itself by tomorrow, and then we should have better data as we go into tomorrow afternoon's runs. But this guy has some really good stuff. Go back through his feeds, and he's got some neat explainers he does, some good graphics, and things like that to follow every once in a while.
It is my goal to get him on the show. I follow him too, and he has some great stuff.
Shout out, let's get him on now.
Let's see what we can do. All right, I think Jared's got his pulled up. So Jared, go ahead.
Sure do. And I third the cranky weather guy recommendation. He's amazing. Does great stuff. So what I got here is something a little different. We got butterflies. And this came across my feed from Penn State Radar Meteorology, and they retweeted this. And so this is a painted lady butterfly invasion in eastern Colorado. And so here's the reflectivity. You can see that you can see the animation there, and so that's that 88D is getting a lot of butterfly effect, so to speak. And then I think the coolest one though is where you see. He calls it the wind drift. Kind of like, I guess the butterflies are almost having to do a maneuver like the hurricane hunters here, where they're oriented southwest but moving towards the northwest because they can't deal with the headwinds. And so you can see this on the 88D, where you see the velocities going from southwest to northwest, but the orientation of the biologicals is a little different. So love the 88D. It's still, despite its name, is still a really fantastic instrument, and thought this is a really cool radar nerdery to share with the group tonight.
Cool. All right.
So the butterflies are crabbing then, is that right? The butterflies are actually crabbing.
That's what that sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
I've got mine, hopefully. You guys see mine?
Yep.
All right, so this is in Boise, Idaho. Let me see if I can get this video going. This is a flooded street, and I want you to watch the fire truck.
Someone had a bad day.
Turn around, don't drown, right?
That's right.
Years ago.
Yeah, so yeah, even fire trucks can't go through flooded roadways. So when Nate, wherever Nate ends up this weekend and early next week, and there's some flooding, remember, turn around, don't drown. Don't be like the fire truck and get stuck in the floodwaters.
Well, here's mine. Philip Klotzbach put this one up, and this is all landfall locations for continental U.S. hurricanes during October since 1851, which that's pretty far back. I mean, forensics has gotten really well with going back and studying storms and and getting these statistics. But you can see how often Florida gets hit, and this event coming together down in the Western Caribbean with taking aim on this part of the country sort of falls right in line with it. So, the Gulf of Mexico remaining warm, that is a definite possibility. So basically, if Nate forms and it hits any portion of this land, it would definitely become another statistic to sort of further this one. So I don't know, not as significant as Jared's. I think Jared takes the cake with his butterflies tonight.
I would be remiss say this time 2 years ago we were looking at the great historic flood in your area, Shay and Jared, with the Charleston flooding. With I know Will was talking about Joaquin earlier. So can you guys believe it's been 2 years since that event happened in your area?
Gosh. Yeah, that was Joaquin. Looking back, I did this extensive blog on it and put so much information there. I think it took me like 2 days to make the blog. It ended up being a ridiculously long blog, but there was so much going on in that. That was such a unique event, and there's a lot of terms for it: the 1,000-year storm, the 14 trillion atmospheric gallon storm. I mean, you name it. There's all kinds of names for it, but just unique, but after seeing Harvey, you're like, wow. I mean, the October flood event was really kind of minuscule compared to what happened over there in Texas this year. So you're just like, every year you're just wowed by these massive rain events. And it seems like, they're just getting, worse in the last few years. So we'll, and tidal flooding and sea level rise also doesn't help with that either. So.
Yeah, and then Ricky, this time a year ago, we were out in Fayetteville chasing Matthew.
Yep, and this time this year, it looks like another tropical storm wants to pay the Charlotte race a visit. So I don't know what it is with that race, but apparently it's not doing well for us. But hey, it helps us out, I guess. So.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's close the show out. Let's talk about next week. Let me pull up the schedule right quick. My phone's not agreeing with me. We have Taylor Trogdon on with us. He's going to be talking about storm surge with the National Hurricane Storm Surge Unit. So kind of fitting with what's going on in the weather world. We're going to have Taylor. I guess we'll have Taylor on with us unless crazy stuff happens. Right, Eric?
Isn't this a rescheduled show too? Wasn't this supposed to be a show and then like Harvey happened or something, I thought?
No, this is a first attempt. We'll just hope that we can get it in.
It was somebody else we had on the Hurricane Center then.
It was Reynolds Wolf. That was the Harvey one.
Gotcha.
So
Eric, see if he can show up with boots on and waterproof phone and just go live and talk about search.
Let's do that.
So we hope that we'll have Taylor on with us next week talking about the Storm Surge Unit there at the National Hurricane Center. And then 10/18, we don't have anything. I just noticed that earlier today. So we are working to get something booked for that. And then to close out October, we have Kat Kimball on October 25th. So that's what it looks like for the next few weeks here for the Carolina Weather Group. We appreciate you watching tonight. Please feel free to subscribe to our podcast and share it out to all your friends and give us some comments on some upcoming shows that you'd like to see. So for everyone here, we hope you stay safe. Monitor Nate will be live all weekend giving you the updates. I'm sure James and I will be doing some updates this weekend about what Nate will be doing. So follow along on our social media pages. And until then, we'll see you next Wednesday night.